I should have known something was wrong as soon as I woke up and noticed an unusual silence outside. The typical morning sounds of Alpine heights, birds chirping in the towering pines, the distant hum of snowmobiles during winter months, were absent. When I opened the door to my luxury mountain cabin, the first thing I saw was a heavy-duty winch stopped right in my driveway, its steel cable gleaming menacingly in the crisp Colorado morning light. Next to it were two men in generic dark blue uniforms, the kind that any HOA loves to give to its volunteers to make them feel like officers of the law. The gold badges pinned to their chests caught the sunlight, making them look almost official if you didn't look too closely at the cheap metal. The HOA officers were there, ready to take my car. It took me a second to process the level of ridiculousness of the scene. There was my limited edition Range Rover, parked exactly where it had been since I bought this mountain retreat 3 years ago. My garage, my property, all completely legal. But that didn't stop those two clowns from trying to play sheriff in a town where everyone knew I was the actual sheriff. One of them was holding a notepad, probably pretending to be filling in a super important report, while the other was talking on the radio as if he were coordinating a high-risk operation. All that was happening was an attempted robbery disguised as an inspection. I made a point of not saying anything right away, firstly because I wanted to see how far this insanity would go, secondly because I wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves. It was only when one of them started attaching the hooks to my Range Rover that I decided to act. "Nice job, huh?" I called out from my doorway. The guy holding the notepad turned to me in surprise, then he regained his pose of fake authority and snorted. "This is an official HOA action. Your vehicle is in violation of the parking regulations." So now I was a dangerous criminal. I crossed my arms, feeling that this was going to be fun. Violation of the regulations? What would those violations be? The man opened his notepad and pointed to a piece of paper full of fine print and bureaucracy. According to Section 14, Paragraph 7, Line 3, it is not permitted to park private vehicles in residential areas for more than 48 consecutive hours without significant movement. I blinked a few times, trying to understand if he really believed the crap he was saying. "So you decided to tow my car because it was parked in my own garage?" The man nodded as if he had just quoted an article from the Constitution. "That's the rule, sir. The HOA takes these infractions very seriously." It was at that moment that I realized they had no idea who I was. They didn't know that they were trying to confiscate the car of the county's sheriff. And my God, how funny that was going to be. But for now, I wanted to see how far they'd take this clowning. "And what's the fine for this major infraction?" The second guy, who until now had only been pretending to talk on the radio, finally decided to get involved. $150. I held in my laughter. "So you're telling me that you're going to tow away an $80,000 car for a $150 fine?" The first man seemed to hesitate for a second, as if his brain was processing the illogicality of the situation. But then he pulled himself together. "The rules have to be followed." "Oh, of course. The rules. The same rules that nobody follows except when the HOA wants them to." Meanwhile, some neighbors began to appear, curious about the scene. I saw an elderly couple whispering, a woman holding her cell phone probably recording, and even the neighbor's husky sitting on the sidewalk looking like he knew someone was going to get screwed. The question was, how far would they go before they realized they were about to make a huge mistake? And the answer came quickly. The tow truck started the engine. They really were going to take my car. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to end the show. It's okay, just give me a second." I took my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed a number I knew very well. On the other end of the line, one of my deputies answered. "Sheriff, what can I do for you this morning?" "I need a car at my address. My car seems to have been stolen." The silence on the other end was quick, followed by a serious tone. "I'm sending a unit now." I hung up the phone and looked at the two imbeciles who were still trying to pretend they had some authority. "Quick warning to you two. I'm the sheriff of Summit County, and in a few minutes a car will be here. Then we'll see who's really breaking the law." Their expression of confidence evaporated instantly. The silence that followed was so delicious that I almost felt bad for them. Almost. They looked at each other, clearly beginning to panic. What had once been a glorified HOA police operation was now turning into a situation in which the real police themselves were about to intervene. What about me? Well, I just pulled into my garage and waited, because this was far from over. If there's one thing I've learned over the years in law enforcement, it's that some people just don't know when to stop. They believe in their own false authority so much that they keep digging the hole even when they're already up to their necks in it. And my friends, the HOA officers, had their shovels in their hands and were digging like crazy. After I informed them that a car was on its way, the two guys exchanged nervous glances. The one holding the notebook looked at the tow truck driver and made a discreet gesture as if to say, "Turn it off now." But the other, the one who until then had been pretending to talk on the radio, still didn't understand the size of the shit he was getting himself into. "We can't let him intimidate the HOA," he declared, raising his chest as if he were defending the rights of the Constitution. I stopped for a second just to appreciate the level of idiocy. The neighbors who were just watching before were now starting to laugh. You could see a couple recording the scene, probably already imagining that it would end up in some viral video on Facebook with the title, "The HOA has finally lost its mind." But the best was yet to come. The sirens sounded in the distance, echoing through the mountain valley. The two men paled instantly. The winch turned off its engine immediately. Now they were beginning to realize that they weren't just messing with some random neighbor. The patrol car stopped right in front of my house, and two of my deputies got out. They weren't rushing or alarmed because, of course, they knew exactly what was going on. I gave a slight nod to Deputy Martinez, who smiled. He knew it was going to be quite a show. Martinez stepped forward, looked at the two men from the HOA, and asked, "Can someone explain to me why there's a tow truck trying to take away the sheriff's car?" And that was that. That was the end of the plastic courage of those two clowns. The one holding the notebook stammered violently, flipping through the pages as if he were suddenly going to find a secret article that would allow him to tow a law enforcement officer's car on his own property. The other, who had previously been speaking thickly, fell completely silent. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it so easily. "Please, explain the situation," I said, crossing my arms. "I'm curious." The first man snorted and tried to regain his poise. "The HOA has very clear regulations." Martinez raised his hand, interrupting. "Right, and you're both policemen." "Quiet. Do you have any authority to impound vehicles?" More silence. "Do you have a removal order issued by a court?" By now, the silence was almost deafening. Martinez then took out a small notepad and continued. "Because as far as I know, removing a private vehicle without legal authorization amounts to attempted theft." Both men's eyes widened. Now they were really scared, but I wanted a bit more. "I'm also curious to know what the HOA board thinks about this." I turned to the neighbors. "Can anyone tell me if this ridiculous operation was approved by the board?" The couple filming laughed. "We haven't heard anything. As far as I know, this fine isn't even official." Another neighbor added, "They've been doing this all week. 3 cars were towed from Aspen Lane yesterday." Martinez smiled and wrote down a few more things. "Got it. So what we have here is an attempt to illegally remove a vehicle without the owner's authorization, without a court order, and without the knowledge of the official HOA administration." He closed the notepad and looked directly at the two men. "Do you want me to continue, or have you realized that you're in deep shit?" If I'd had a camera at that moment, I would have captured a perfect portrait of absolute defeat. The man with the notepad began to sweat. The other couldn't even look straight ahead. That's when Martinez threw the icing on the cake. "Which one of you is Karen?" It was as if someone had thrown a grenade in there. Even the neighbors started laughing. By now it was obvious that the great leader behind this tomfoolery wasn't there in person, probably waiting for her henchmen to sort it all out themselves. But now that the real police were involved, I was sure she'd show up in no time. And she did. "What's going on here?" The shrill voice came from behind the group. And when I turned to look, there she was, the president of the HOA, the woman who thought she ran the entire Alpine Heights community, marching in like a medieval queen arriving on the battlefield. And the best part? She had no idea what awaited her. If the HOA cops were already drowning in their own stupidity, now the captain of the ship was coming to sink them for good. Karen came marching down the sidewalk with the fury of a dictator on the verge of a coup. Her short blonde hair in disarray, her cheeks red with rage, and a notebook of fines clenched so tightly that it looked like it was about to explode. I knew this was going to be good. "Can someone explain to me why there's a county car here?" she fired, not even realizing that the whole scene was already out of her control. The two HOA cops, once full of confidence, now looked like children who had broken the school window and knew they were going to get screwed. Neither of them answered. Then she looked at me. "What did you do?" I smiled. "Oh, nothing much. I just called the police because two people tried to steal my car in front of everyone." Karen blinked a few times. "Steal? That's standard HOA procedure." Martinez raised an eyebrow. So you're the one who authorized this removal." Karen hesitated. She realized she was being cornered. "Well, the HOA has authority over the rules of the community." "Actually, it doesn't," Martinez cut her off, flipping through his own notepad. "So far, we haven't found any evidence that you have the right to tow cars without formal authorization, let alone inside someone's garage." The silence was awkward. Even the neighbors were trying to hold in their laughter. But Karen wasn't going to give up without trying some ridiculous card. "This man has broken the rules." I crossed my arms, expecting the joke. What rules would those be? She quickly opened her notebook, flipped through the pages, and found that regulation those two clowns had mentioned before. Section 14, paragraph 7, line 3 clearly states that private vehicles may not remain parked without significant movement for more than 48 consecutive hours. I let out a short laugh. "So, to clarify, you think you can take a car out of a resident's garage because he hasn't driven for 2 days? That's an official regulation." Martinez sighed, out of patience. "Okay, so do you have records to prove that this car hasn't been moved for more than 48 hours? Karen opened her mouth to answer, then she closed it, then she opened it again and closed it again. Because of course they had absolutely nothing. Now all the neighbors were watching her defeat as if they were in the front row of a comedy show. But I wasn't finished yet. "By the way, do you know whose car this is?" Karen snorted. "Yours, obviously." I nodded slowly. "And do you know who I am?" The silence on her face was priceless. She tried to keep her posture, but you could see that her brain was going haywire. "I know you're a resident." Martinez smiled. So no one told you that he's also the sheriff of Summit County." And that's when I saw all the color disappear from her face. Karen froze. Her eyes blinked rapidly as if she was trying to calculate the consequences and realizing that she had made the worst mistake of her life. Martinez continued. "Now, just for fun, because in this case, trying to remove his vehicle without permission is a crime. And if it's proven that it was intentional, we're talking about abuse of power and misappropriation." Karen started to sweat. "Wait, come on, let's think about this calmly." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Of course, let's think about it together." He looked at me. "Do you want to file a formal complaint?" All eyes were on me. Even Karen seemed to be holding her breath, and I wanted to make the most of this moment. I crossed my arms and nodded slightly, pretending to consider. Then I sighed dramatically. "Well, I could sue the HOA for that, but I think there's a simpler way to solve it." Karen seemed to see a light at the end of the tunnel. "Great, we can find a reasonable solution." But I was ready for the final blow. "I just want this absurd $150 fine to be officially revoked, and for you, Karen, to send an email to all the residents explaining that the HOA made a mistake." The horror in her eyes was better than any revenge. She hesitated. She tried to think of some way to escape the humiliation, but there was no way out. Either I did this, or I sued the HOA until there wasn't even a "no stepping on grass" sign left. The woman had no choice. "Okay," she mumbled, almost spitting out the words. "What?" I asked, pretending not to have heard. She gritted her teeth. "All right, let's cancel the fine and I'll send the email." The neighbors started applauding. The couple recording almost choked with laughter. Even Martinez smiled. "Great decision, Karen. Now I suggest you release the tow truck before someone decides to sue you for obstruction of private property." The two HOA cops unhooked my car at lightning speed. Karen stormed out, probably already planning her revenge. But you know what? I've been waiting for this because people like her never know when to give up. If you think Karen accepted defeat with dignity and got on with her life, you clearly don't know the kind of person who gets into the HOA to run other people's lives. Because she tried to give back, and my friend, that's where she dug her own grave. The public humiliation of the last meeting had dealt her a heavy blow. The email the HOA sent canceling my fine and admitting the mistake spread through Alpine Heights like wildfire. And now everyone knew that the great leader had been defeated. But of course, she wasn't going to let it go. 3 days after the tow truck incident, I received a new notice from the HOA. And when I say new notice, I mean the most ridiculous and desperate attack I've ever seen. The envelope read as follows: "Dear resident, you are being notified of a public nuisance due to an improper event that occurred on your property that resulted in an uncomfortable situation for other residents. The HOA assesses this incident as a violation of the rules of conduct, and you will be required to attend a disciplinary hearing." I read it 3 times to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. She wanted to fine me for calling the police when they tried to steal my car. It was so absurd that I just started laughing. But do you know what my real reaction was? I went to the meeting. Yes, I made a point of showing up because if Karen wanted a show, then I was going to put on a show. This time, the meeting was packed. After the tow truck mess, almost all the residents of Alpine Heights decided to show up, probably to see how far this insanity would go. Karen was there, sitting at the center of the table like a queen about to issue a decree. But for the first time, she didn't look so confident. Perhaps because she knew it was ridiculous. Maybe because she realized that no one respected her authority anymore. But still, she tried. "Sir, you have been summoned here to discuss your recent violation of the rules of coexistence." I crossed my arms. What violation would that be? She snorted. "You caused an uproar in the community by involving the police in a matter that could have been resolved internally." I had to hold back my laughter. "Wait a minute. Are you telling me that when you tried to steal my car, I should have dealt with it internally?" The neighbors were already laughing, but Karen doubled down. "The HOA has its rules and procedures, and we must ensure that there is no abuse of authority." That was the last straw. She was accusing me of abuse of authority after trying to steal my car. I leaned against the table, looking her right in the eye. "Well, Karen, if you want to talk about abuse of authority, maybe we should discuss the fact that not only did you send your goons to try to confiscate my property, but you also used the HOA as an excuse to get rid of anyone you don't like." The room fell silent. Karen swallowed, because now I had everyone's attention. I continued. "Has anyone here ever received a fine from the HOA for something ridiculous?" A man raised his hand. "I got one for leaving my garbage can out 5 minutes longer than allowed." Another woman spoke up. "I was fined because my grass was 2 centimeters over the limit." And then more and more residents began to speak up. "I was fined because my curtain was beige and not white." "She had my garden uprooted because she said it didn't fit in with the neighborhood." "I got a warning because my children were playing too loudly in the pool." And so it went. Suddenly, everyone realized what was really going on there. Karen wasn't trying to manage anything. She was just controlling everyone for the sheer fun of it. She tried to intervene. The HOA exists to maintain community standards. But it was too late. One of the residents stood up and pointed at the table. "So why aren't the HOA's financial records available for viewing?" Silence. Another resident spoke up. Yes, why have our fees increased out of the blue in the last year, but there have been no improvements to the community? More silence. Karen started to sweat, because now it wasn't just about me. It was about her having spent years abusing the power of the HOA for her own benefit. It was then that a voice from the back of the room cut through the tension like a knife. I think I might be able to shed some light on that. All heads turned to see a man in a crisp suit standing at the entrance of the meeting room. He walked forward confidently, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. My name is Victor Ramirez. I'm with the State Attorney's Office, Financial Crimes Division. The room went completely silent. Karen's face turned from red to ashen in seconds. Ms. Karen Thompson, he continued, I've been investigating the financial activities of several HOAs in Colorado for the past 6 months, and Alpine Heights has some interesting patterns. Karen stood up abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. Everyone needs to leave immediately. Victor smiled calmly. Actually, I'd prefer if everyone stayed. Public transparency is important in these matters. He opened his portfolio and pulled out several documents. For instance, did you know that your HOA has been charging residents for snow removal services from a company called Mountain Peak Maintenance? A company that, interestingly enough, was registered 2 years ago with Karen Thompson listed as the primary stakeholder. Gasps filled the room. Karen was now visibly shaking. That's not illegal. Many HOA presidents have side businesses. True, Victor nodded. But billing the HOA $30,000 last winter for services that were never fully performed, that's fraud. A resident shouted from the back. My driveway was never cleared once last winter. I had to do it myself. Victor continued. And then there's the matter of the Community Improvement Fund. According to my investigation, residents have contributed over $75,000 in the past year, yet there's only $12,000 remaining in the account. Karen grabbed her purse. I don't have to listen to this. You have no authority here. Victor pulled out another document. Actually, I have a warrant to seize all HOA financial records. And Sheriff, he nodded in my direction, I may need your assistance in executing it. I couldn't have planned this better myself. Of course, Mr. Ramirez, my deputies and I are at your disposal. Karen made a desperate dash for the door, but Deputy Martinez was already there, blocking her exit. Karen Thompson, I said, standing up, I think it's time we had a different kind of conversation about rules and authority. The neighbor who had been filming everything whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. This is better than any Netflix drama. In the weeks that followed, a full investigation was opened. Residents demanded transparency in the HOA's accounts. And guess what? There were hundreds of thousands of dollars missing. Victor Ramirez's investigation revealed that Karen had been embezzling funds for years, using fake companies, inflated invoices, and phantom services to funnel community money into her personal accounts. The most shocking revelation came when investigators discovered that Karen didn't even own property in Alpine Heights. She was renting under a false name and had fabricated her credentials to get elected to the HOA board. She had pulled the same scheme in 3 other communities across Colorado before landing in our mountain paradise. Karen tried to run away from the issue, but the evidence was overwhelming. Not only did she lose her job, but she had to answer to the courts. And ironically, the very law enforcement she tried to intimidate were the ones who followed the whole process. After everything was settled, Alpine Heights decided that it would never have an HOA again, at least not in its previous form. The residents organized a small assembly to set new guidelines, but this time without idiotic bureaucracy. Victor Ramirez even helped draft a new community charter that emphasized transparency and limited powers. And you know what happened? The place didn't turn into chaos. The houses remained beautiful. The lawns were still mowed. The snow was properly cleared by a legitimate company. But above all, no one was forced to follow absurd rules just because a woman wanted to feel powerful. As for me, well, my Range Rover is still in my garage. And every time I look at it, I remember, there's nothing like seeing a dictator fall. The best part of the story, Victor Ramirez became a regular visitor to Alpine Heights. Turns out, he bought one of the vacation properties that went up for sale after several of Karen's accomplices decided to leave the community. He and I occasionally share a whiskey on my deck, looking out over the mountains and laughing about how one woman's power trip led to her downfall. You know, he told me one evening as the sun set behind the peaks, what happened here in Alpine Heights is becoming a case study for HOA reform across the state. I smiled. Sometimes it takes a little confrontation to restore common sense. And a sheriff who doesn't mind standing up to petty tyrants, he added, raising his glass. To freedom from ridiculous rules, I thought, and to parking my car wherever the hell I want on my own property. Don't forget to leave a like and comment on what you thought of this story.